Andrea Martinez was 55 years old, and she was cargo. Her life had been boiled down to the splintered wood of a cage on wheels, baking under the merciless Arizona sun of 1878. Every jolt of the wagon was a reminder of how far she'd fallen. From a respected seamstress in Santa Fe, a widow who'd built a life with her own two hands, to this, sold. A piece of property to be delivered to some mining camp deep in Apache territory. She pressed her face against the rough-hewn bars, the dust coating her skin, her throat a desert in itself. The gray streaks in her hair felt like a map of all the years she'd spent surviving. And for what? To end up here? "It's been 20 years since my last kiss," she whispered, the words swallowed by the creaking of the wheels. The irony was a bitter pill. Sold for desire, yet a stranger to any real tenderness for 2 long decades. In the cage with her were 2 other women. Maria, barely a woman at 18, trembled constantly, her eyes wide with a terror that never faded. And Ruth, a woman of 40, with a face as hard as the landscape around them. Ruth had been on this journey twice before. She'd survived. That single fact was both a comfort and a horror. The guards rode alongside the wagons, their faces leathered by the sun, their eyes empty. They were just men doing a job, transporting human freight. The lead guard, a scarred man named Thompson, was the worst of them. He never looked at them as people. He looked at them like livestock, calculating their worth and their trouble. "Keep your head down when we stop," Ruth muttered, her voice a dry rasp. "Don't give them a reason to notice you." Andrea nodded, but her mind was a world away, back in her little shop in Santa Fe. The smell of linen and thread, the quiet dignity of her work. It had all been swept away in a single night. Creditors, they'd said. Debts she owed to dangerous men. It felt like a lie then, and it felt like a lie now. It was too clean, too simple. An excuse to take her, to erase her. Thompson's voice cut through the heat. "Water break, 10 minutes, then we push for Copper Ridge." The wagons groaned to a halt. As the guards dismounted, Andrea closed her eyes, trying to find a core of strength inside her. She had survived her husband's death. She had survived building a business from nothing. She would survive this. She had to. Ruth watched her, a strange look in her eyes. "You're different from the others. Most women your age would have broken by now." "Maybe I'm already broken," Andrea replied, her voice soft, "just in ways that don't show." That's when they heard it, a sound that didn't belong. The drumming of hoofbeats, fast and getting faster. Thompson and his men cursed, grabbing their rifles. They scanned the horizon, their practiced ease suddenly gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. "Apache!" one of the guards screamed, pointing to a dusty ridge. Silhouettes appeared against the skyline. Dozens of them. They moved like ghosts, like they were born from the dust and the rock itself. Chaos exploded. Thompson was shouting orders, trying to form a defensive circle with the wagons, but it was useless. They were flies caught in a spider's web. The Apache warriors descended. Their war cries were the sound of the earth itself screaming for vengeance. The air filled with the whistle of arrows and the crack of gunfire. Andrea huddled with Maria and Ruth, the cage shaking as bullets and arrows thudded into its wooden frame. The smell of gunpowder and blood and fear was suffocating. Ruth screamed, "Stay down!" as an arrow ripped through the canvas cover just inches from Andrea's head. Through the gaps in the cage, Andrea saw them, the warriors. They moved with a terrifying grace, their faces painted, their bodies lean and powerful. These weren't just men. They were in force of nature, and they were winning. The guards were falling one by one, their defense crumbling in seconds. The wagon lurched violently. One of the lead horses went down, screaming. Maria shrieked as their cage tilted, the wood groaning, threatening to splinter and break. "It's going over!" Ruth yelled. The world turned upside down. Andrea was thrown against the bars, her head slamming into the hard wood. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the face of a warrior, his eyes locking onto hers through the bars. There was no hatred in his gaze. There was something else, something she couldn't understand. Then nothing. Silence returned to the desert. The battle was over. The wreckage of the caravan was a scar on the landscape, a testament to the brutal efficiency of the raid. Among the bodies of guards and horses, under the splintered remains of the overturned wagon, Andrea Martinez was miraculously, impossibly, still breathing. As the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky the color of the violence that had just unfolded, a lone figure appeared on the ridge. He was tall, his frame powerful, his long black hair adorned with eagle feathers. He surveyed the scene with the calm, practiced eye of a leader. This was Nal Nish. His name meant he works. A man of 35 years who had mastered the art of survival in this unforgiving land. He felt no joy in the slaughter. The attack was a necessity, a message to those who dared to cross into their territory. Now he moved through the aftermath, his duty to ensure no one was left to suffer. That's when he heard it. A faint moan, almost lost in the wind. It came from the wrecked wagon. He dismounted, his movements fluid and silent. He began pulling away the splintered wood, the torn canvas, and what he found beneath would change his life, and hers forever. A woman with hair like spun silver, her face streaked with dust and blood, but her features holding a dignity that even unconsciousness could not erase. She was older than the women they usually found in these slave wagons. There was a strength in the lines of her face, a story of a life lived, not just endured. For a reason he couldn't name, Nal Nish felt a pull, a sense of recognition. He carefully, gently lifted the debris away from her. He checked her injuries with a practiced hand, noting the gash on her forehead, but seeing no other life-threatening wounds. His warriors were gathering the spoils of their victory. Weapons, supplies, horses. By all rights, this woman was now their captive. Property, just as she had been to the men they had just killed. But as he looked at her, at the calloused hands that spoke of honest labor, he knew he couldn't leave her to the desert. He made a decision that would ripple through his band, that went against the cold logic of their war. He lifted Andrea's unconscious form into his arms. She was lighter than he expected. He secured her carefully on his horse, wrapping her in a blanket. As he rode away into the deepening twilight, the desert wind whispered around them. He was not just carrying a survivor. He was carrying a secret, a question, a future neither of them could possibly imagine. He had saved her from one cage, but what world had he just brought her into? And more importantly, why did he feel like he was the one who had just been captured? Andrea woke up to the smell of sage and cooking meat. The air was cool and clean. A gentle crackling sound came from a nearby fire, and she could hear the soft trickle of water. For a moment, she was suspended in a dream, a place far from the horror of the cage. Then it all came rushing back. The attack, the wagon flipping, the warrior's eyes. Panic seized her. She tried to sit up, her body screaming in protest. A dozen different aches and pains flared to life. She was lying on soft buffalo hides, covered by warm blankets. The gash on her forehead had been cleaned and bandaged with some kind of herbal poultice. Her torn, filthy traveling dress was gone, replaced by a simple, clean deerskin tunic. She was inside a wickiup, a traditional Apache dwelling. Through the entrance, she could see the crisp blue of a morning sky. "You should rest." The voice was deep, calm, and laced with an accent. It came from the entrance. A man stood there, silhouetted against the morning light. As he stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. It was him, the warrior from the battle. He was even more imposing up close, tall with a chest and shoulders that spoke of immense strength. His long black hair was tied back with a simple leather cord. Tattoos and faded scars marked his skin, each one a chapter in a story she couldn't read. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, intelligent, and held a surprising gentleness that seemed completely at odds with the violent warrior she had witnessed. You saved me," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He moved with a quiet confidence, carrying a bowl of water and another of a steaming herbal tea. "You were trapped. The desert is not kind to the wounded." Her hands trembled as she took the water, the cool liquid a balm to her parched throat. "The others?" she asked, dreading the answer. "Were there other survivors?" His expression was unreadable, but a shadow passed through his eyes. "You were the only one." The words landed like stones. Maria, so young. Ruth, who had seen it all before. Gone. The guards, brutal as they were, gone. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Why? She asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Her fear was a living thing inside her, but her pride wouldn't let it show. Why save me? He set the tea beside her and settled onto his haunches, a position he held with an easy, natural grace. I do not make war on women who have already been made prisoners by other men. He paused, his eyes studying her face intently. Your captors brought you into our territory, but you did not choose to come. There was something in the way he said it, a hidden meaning. It wasn't just a statement of principle. It was a question. You speak English very well, she deflected, needing a moment to think. I spent time in the mission schools as a boy, he said, a hint of old sadness in his tone. Before I understood what my people were losing, the white man's language is useful for understanding his intentions. She sipped the tea. It was bitter, but it warmed her. Looking at this man, she realized every story she'd ever been told about the Apache was a lie, a caricature designed to inspire fear. This was no mindless savage. This was a man with a code, a history, a complex and thoughtful mind. And he was watching her, waiting for something. What will happen to me now? She asked. That depends, he said slowly. First, you will heal. After that, he trailed off, his gaze sharp. Tell me, what was your life before the cage? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her life, about the woman she was, since she'd been taken. I was a seamstress, she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. In Santa Fe, I had a small shop. I made dresses. He nodded, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. A woman of skill, independent. He looked at her hands, still calloused despite weeks of captivity. That explains much. What does it explain? Why you do not have the eyes of a slave, he said simply. You have known respect. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. He saw her, not as cargo, not as an old woman, not as a victim. He saw the person she had been, the person she still was, buried under layers of dust and fear. She told him everything. Her husband's death, the struggle to keep her shop, the debts that appeared from nowhere, the creditors who seemed more like vultures. As she spoke, Nalnish's jaw tightened. The white man's world has many ways of making slaves of its own people. In the days that followed, Andrea's body began to heal, but it was her spirit that underwent the greater transformation. Nalnish's band was small, about 30 people living a traditional life deep in the canyons, far from the reservations. And they did not treat her like a captive. They treated her like a guest, an anomaly they didn't quite understand, but one who was under their leader's protection. The children were fascinated by her gray hair. The women, initially wary, slowly warmed to her as she began to help with daily chores, her hands finding familiar comfort in mending torn clothes, her skills as a seamstress proving surprisingly valuable. She watched Nalnish. He was the heart of this small community. He settled disputes with quiet wisdom. He taught the young boys to hunt with infinite patience. He listened to the elders with genuine respect. He was a true leader, his strength used to protect, not to dominate. One evening, he came to sit by her as she mended a child's shirt by the fire. A comfortable silence had grown between them, a space where words were often unnecessary. You do not have to work so hard, he said, his voice a low rumble. Idle hands trouble my mind, she replied with a small smile, and I like to be useful. He watched the flicker of the firelight on her face. You have always taken care of others. It wasn't a question. My husband, she found herself saying, he was sick for a long time. Then my customers, I suppose it's what I know best. And who, he asked, his voice soft but piercing, cared for you? The question stopped her cold. She looked up from her sewing, the simple query striking a place in her heart that had been silent for years. I managed on my own. That is not the same thing, he said. Their eyes met across the fire, and in that moment, she saw it, a shared loneliness, the isolation of the responsible one, the man who carried the weight of his entire people on his shoulders. The words she'd whispered in the wagon came back to her. 20 years, she said, her voice barely audible. It's been 20 years since someone cared if I was happy or sad, lonely or afraid. His expression softened. That is a long time to carry such burdens alone. They sat in silence as the stars began to appear, a brilliant tapestry in the clear desert sky. She found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the high cheekbones. He was a beautiful man, his beauty not in form, but in essence, in the perfect harmony of who he was and how he lived. But there was still a wall between them, the unspoken question, the reason he had really saved her. It wasn't just a simple act of compassion. She knew it, she felt it. There was a piece of the puzzle missing. Nal Nish, she said, her voice steady. Why was I the only one you found alive? He turned to face her fully, the firelight casting shadows across his face. He was silent for a long moment, and she thought he wouldn't answer. Because, he said, his voice low and heavy, with a truth he had clearly carried alone. I was not there to raid the caravan. Andrea's blood ran cold. What do you mean? I was tracking the lead guard, the scarred man, Thompson. He looked away toward the darkness of the canyon. He and his men killed my younger brother 6 moons ago. They were not just slave traders. They worked for a man who wants this land, a man who murders my people to clear it. I followed them for weeks. The raid? It was an opportunity to take the man who stole my brother's life. The world tilted on its axis. He hadn't saved her. He had been hunting. She was just collateral. Something found in the aftermath. The kindness, the care. What was it all? Pity. But you were looking for something else too, she pressed, a sudden chilling certainty taking hold. When you found me, you were looking for someone. Nal Nish finally met her eyes, and the pain in them was raw. The man Thompson works for, his name is Corbin, a powerful rancher. He has a wife, a woman with silver hair, known for her skill with a needle. We were told she was traveling with the caravan. I thought, he hesitated, I thought you were her. I thought I had captured a piece of my enemy's heart, a way to force him to answer for my brother's blood. Andrea felt the air leave her lungs. A bargaining chip. That's what he'd seen when he pulled her from the wreckage. Not a person, a tool, a weapon. So all of this, she whispered, gesturing to the wickiup, the blankets, the care he had shown her, it was for her, for the woman you thought I was. The kindness she had cherished suddenly felt like a lie. The respect she had treasured felt like a misunderstanding. She wasn't Andrea. She was a ghost, a case of mistaken identity. At first, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, but when I saw you, when I heard your story, I saw not the wife of my enemy, but a woman who has suffered at his hands just as my people have. Corbin is the one who created your false debts. He is the one who had you sold. He wanted your property in Santa Fe. He wanted you erased. It all crashed down on her, the missing pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. It wasn't random. It was a conspiracy. She had been targeted, hunted, and discarded by the same man who had murdered Nal Nish's brother. They were enemies of the same enemy. But that didn't change the fact that his initial act of salvation was built on a lie that shattered the fragile trust she had just begun to build. She stood up, the mended shirt falling from her lap. The cool night air felt like ice on her skin. She felt more alone now than she had in the cage. I am not his wife, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. And I am not your weapon. She turned and walked away from the fire, away from him, into the darkness of the canyon, the weight of 2 truths crushing her. The man who had shown her more kindness than anyone in 20 years had done so, because he thought she was someone else. And the man who destroyed her life was still out there. And now he knew she was missing. He would not simply let his property disappear. He would come looking for her, and he would bring hell with him. The next few days were a quiet agony. Andrea kept to herself, performing her tasks with a mechanical efficiency. The warmth she'd felt toward the Apache people now chilled by the hard edge of Nal Nish's revelation. He gave her space, his eyes following her with a heavy, mournful expression, but he did not approach her. The comfortable silence between them had been replaced by a chasm of unspoken words and broken trust. She was adrift. She didn't belong in the white man's world that had discarded her, and she didn't belong here, where her very presence was the result of a mistake. She was a ghost in someone else's war. One afternoon, as she was gathering herbs with Ayana, the old woman who had first befriended her, a commotion erupted from the edge of the camp. A scout had returned, his horse lathered, his face grim. He spoke in urgent, guttural Apache, and though Andrea couldn't understand the words, she understood the tone. Danger. Nal Nish met the scout, his face hardening into a mask of stone as he listened. His eyes, dark and stormy, swept across the camp until they found hers. He strode toward her, his purpose clear. "What is it?" Andrea asked, her heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. "A rider was seen, miles from here. A woman, alone," he said, his voice tight. Andrea's blood ran cold. There was only one woman it could be. "Ruth!" Nalnish nodded. She was not heading back toward the settlements. She was heading deeper into the mountains, as if searching. It didn't make any sense. Why would Ruth be looking for them? Unless she hadn't been a prisoner at all. The cynical advice, the strange looks, the way she'd survived 2 previous journeys, it had never added up. "She works for him," Andrea breathed, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "Corbin, she must have been his agent in the wagon, to keep the cargo in line. And now she is his scout," Nalnish finished, the grim logic undeniable. "She will lead him to us." The fragile peace of the canyon was shattered. They were exposed, hunted, and it was all because of her. A council was held. The elders and warriors gathered, their voices a low, tense hum. Options were debated. They could run, vanishing deeper into the mountains where no white man could follow. Or they could stay and fight, defending the home they had carved out of the wilderness. Andrea stood apart, an outcast, the cause of this looming disaster. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her. She had brought this danger to the people who had, for whatever reason, shown her mercy. As the debate raged on, Nalnish walked away from the council fire. He came to her, stopping a few feet away. The space between them crackled with tension. "This is my fault," she said, her voice flat. "I will not let your people die for me." "This is not your fault," he countered, his voice raw. "This is Corbin's. He has hunted my family. He has hunted you. This fight was coming, with or without you. But I led them here." "No," he said, stepping closer. "Ruth led them here, and I led you here. If there is blame, it is shared." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for her to understand. "Everything I told you was the truth. My reasons for finding you were a mistake, but my reasons for wanting you to stay, they are not." He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently brushed her cheek. His touch was like a spark on dry tinder. "I have seen you, Andrea Martinez," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "Not the wife of my enemy, not a weapon. I see a woman with the strength of the mountain and a heart that has been alone for too long. I see a fire that has not been extinguished, but has been waiting for air to breathe." Her resolve began to crumble. The anger, the hurt, it was all still there. But beneath it, something else was stirring, a desperate, foolish hope. "The council is divided," he continued. "Many wish to run, to abandon this place. But I will not. My brother's spirit cries out for justice. I will not let the man who murdered him drive us from our homes." He paused, his gaze locking onto hers. "But we cannot win this fight with arrows against rifles alone. I know how to fight in these canyons. But you know how our enemy thinks." She stared at him, understanding dawning. He wasn't just offering an apology. He was offering a partnership, a place, a purpose. "What are you asking?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am asking you to fight with us, not as a captive, not as a guest, as one of us." The choice hung in the air. She could demand he take her away, leave her somewhere safe, and wash her hands of this conflict. Or she could embrace this new, terrifying reality. She could stop being a victim, a piece of cargo being moved from one place to another, and become a warrior in her own right. She thought of her shop, her quiet, lonely life. It was safe, it was predictable, and it was empty. Here, surrounded by danger, she felt more alive than she had in 20 years. "All right," she said, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Tell me your plan." A flicker of relief, of something more, passed through his eyes. "We do not run. We set a trap." Over the next 2 days, the camp transformed. Under Nal Nish's direction, the warriors began to prepare the canyon for a battle. But it was Andrea who provided the key. "Corbin is an arrogant man," she explained to Nal Nish and his council. "He thinks of you as savages. He will expect you to fight in the ways he has heard about in stories. Ambushes from the high rocks. A direct, chaotic assault. He will not expect subtlety." She remembered the terrain from her first days in the camp. The narrow passes, the hidden caves, the areas where rock slides were common. She also remembered the stories she'd heard in Santa Fe, the fears and superstitions of the settlers and soldiers. "We don't fight them where they are strong," she said, sketching a map in the dirt. "We draw them into a place where their numbers are a weakness. And we don't just fight their bodies, we fight their minds." The plan was audacious. It was a gamble that relied on a perfect fusion of Apache knowledge of the land and Andrea's understanding of the white man's psychology. They would use diversions, misdirection, and fear itself as their primary weapons. They would make the canyon itself their ally. As they worked, a new dynamic formed between Andrea and Nal Nish. The wall of hurt and misunderstanding was replaced by the focused energy of two commanders planning a battle. They argued, they strategized, they found a rhythm, their minds working in concert. In the heat of their shared purpose, the last of her resentment burned away, replaced by a grudging and then a wholehearted respect. On the third day, the scouts returned. They were coming, a party of at least 20 men, heavily armed, led by a large man on a fine horse, Corbin, and riding beside him was Ruth. The trap was set, the bait was in place. Andrea stood with Nal Nish on a high ledge overlooking the entrance to the canyon. The sun was setting, casting long, ominous shadows. The air was still. The entire band was hidden, concealed in positions throughout the canyon, silent and waiting. "Are you afraid?" Nal Nish asked quietly, his eyes on the horizon. "Terrified," she admitted, "but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I am in the right place." He turned to her, and the setting sun illuminated his face. The warrior, the leader, the man who carried so much grief. But in his eyes there was something new, a light that had not been there before. "The name my people have given you is Bidzil," he said. "It means she is strong." Before she could react, he leaned in. His hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle but firm. He looked into her eyes, a silent question passing between them, a question that had nothing to do with battle plans or survival. And then he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound recognition. It was a bridge across two worlds, a promise in the face of death. It was the end of a 20-year drought, a rainstorm in the desert of her heart. It was coming home to a place she'd never known existed. When he pulled away, the last light of day was gone, and the canyon was bathed in the pale light of the rising moon. In the distance, they heard the sound of approaching horses. "They're here," she whispered. "Let them come," Nal Nish said, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together. "Let them see what happens when they hunt in our lands." The battle for the canyon began not with a war cry, but with a whisper of the wind. Corbin and his men rode into the narrow pass with the confidence of conquerors. Ruth pointed out the location of the abandoned camp, her face a mask of cold satisfaction. "They can't have gone far," Corbin grunted, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Spread out. Find the woman. I want her alive. The rest of them, leave no one." His men dismounted, their rifles at the ready, moving into the canyon. But the canyon was silent, too silent. The air grew heavy, oppressive. The shadows seemed to dance at the edge of their vision. Then it started, a single high-pitched wail from the cliffs above, a sound that was not quite human. It was answered by another from a different direction. Soon the air was filled with these unnerving cries, echoing and overlapping until it was impossible to tell where they were coming from. It was Andrea's idea. The women and children, hidden safely in high caves, using hollowed gourds to create a disorienting, terrifying chorus. It played on the invaders' deepest fears of the savage wilderness. Corbin's men grew visibly nervous, their arrogant swagger replaced by jerky, uncertain movements. They bunched together, their eyes darting toward the cliffs. "It's just noise!" Corbin bellowed. "Keep moving!" But then the ground beneath them erupted, not with warriors, but with dozens of small, smoky fires, ignited simultaneously by hidden Apache. They had been prepared with damp leaves and pungent herbs. A thick, choking smoke filled the canyon floor, obscuring vision and making it difficult to breathe. Panic began to set in. The men were coughing, their eyes watering. They were blind, surrounded by eerie sounds and utterly disoriented. This wasn't a battle. It was a nightmare. That's when the first arrows flew. Not to kill, but to herd. They struck the rocks near the men, clattering loudly, forcing them back, deeper into the canyon, toward the narrowest part of the pass, a section Andrea had identified as a natural trap. "It's an ambush! Fall back!" one of the men screamed, but there was no falling back. Behind them, a thunderous roar filled the air as Nal Nish's warriors, on his signal, released the ropes holding back a carefully prepared rock slide. Boulders and scree crashed down, sealing the canyon entrance. They were trapped. Corbin, enraged and desperate, fired his pistol blindly into the smoke. "Show yourselves, you cowards!" And as if in answer, the smoke began to clear. But what was revealed was not a charging line of warriors. It was something far more unnerving. Figures stood on the ledges above them, silent and motionless. Not just warriors, but what looked like spirits, draped in white cloth, their faces painted like skulls. Another of Andrea's suggestions, using Apache legends to fight a psychological war. The morale of Corbin's men shattered completely. This was a haunted land. They were fighting ghosts. Several of them dropped their rifles and tried to scramble up the canyon walls, only to be picked off with terrifying precision by Nal Nish's archers. The battle was all but over before it had truly begun. Corbin's force was broken, scattered, and terrified. Corbin himself, along with Ruth and a handful of his most loyal men, made a desperate push forward, deeper into the canyon, hoping to find another way out. They stumbled into a small open clearing, and there, waiting for them, was Nal Nish. He was not alone. He was flanked by a dozen of his best warriors. And standing slightly behind him, her face set with a grim determination Andrea had never known she possessed, was Andrea. Corbin's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in fury. "You," he snarled, his gaze fixing on Andrea. "You worthless old hag. You were supposed to be rotting in a mining camp. You've caused me more trouble than you're worth." "You took my home," Andrea said, her voice clear and steady, echoing in the clearing. "You tried to erase my life, but you failed." Ruth stared at Andrea, her expression a mixture of shock and hatred. "I should have killed you in the wagon." "Yes," Andrea agreed. "You should have." Corbin raised his rifle, aiming it directly at Andrea. "I'll finish the job myself." But before he could fire, an arrow, faster than the eye could follow, struck the rifle from his hands. It was Nal Nish. He lowered his bow, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "Your fight is with me," Nal Nish said, his voice low and dangerous. What happened next was a blur of brutal, close-quarters combat. The Apache warriors descended on Corbin's remaining men with a lethal fury. But the central conflict was between the two leaders. Corbin drew a large hunting knife and charged, roaring with rage. Nal Nish met him with only a knife of his own. Their fight was a clash of two worlds. Corbin was brute strength, wild and undisciplined. Nal Nish was fluid grace, every movement precise, economical, deadly. He was the desert wind, and Corbin was the clumsy bear. While they fought, Andrea's eyes were locked on Ruth. The other woman, seeing the battle was lost, began to scramble away, trying to escape into the rocks. Without thinking, Andrea grabbed a heavy branch from the ground and ran after her. She cornered Ruth against a rock face. The woman who had pretended to be her fellow prisoner now looked at her with the eyes of a cornered snake. "You think you've won?" Ruth spat. "You're one of them now. They'll tire of you, an old white woman. You have no place here." I have more of a place here than I ever did in a world that lets men like Corbin do as they please, Andrea retorted, her voice shaking but firm. Ruth lunged, a small dagger appearing in her hand. Andrea was not a fighter. She was a 55-year-old seamstress. But she was also Bidzil. She was strong. She swung the branch with all her might. The wood connected with Ruth's arm, and the dagger clattered to the ground. Before Ruth could recover, Andrea swung again. A desperate, powerful blow that sent the other woman crumbling to the dirt, unconscious. Andrea stood over her, breathing heavily, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had done it. She had fought back. She turned just in time to see the conclusion of the other fight. Nal Nish, with a final, swift movement, disarmed Corbin, sending his knife spinning into the dust. The large rancher stood heaving, defeated and unarmed, before the Apache leader. Corbin's arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic, pleading fear. Wait, we can make a deal. I have money. Gold. Nalnish looked at him with utter contempt. Your money is worthless here. He looked past Corbin, his eyes finding the entrance to a small cave behind him. He pointed. My brother's body lies in that cave. You will go to him, and you will tell his spirit that justice has been done. Corbin stared, uncomprehending. Then a slow, horrifying understanding dawned on his face as two of Nalnish's warriors grabbed his arms. No! No, you can't! He screamed as they dragged him toward the dark opening of the cave. You can't just leave me in there! His screams were cut short as they shoved him inside. Another warrior rolled a massive boulder into place, sealing the cave entrance completely. Sealing Corbin in a dark, silent tomb with the ghost of the man he had murdered. Silence descended on the clearing, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. It was over. Nalnish walked to Andrea. He gently took the heavy branch from her trembling hands, letting it fall to the ground. He looked at the gash on her arm where Ruth's dagger had grazed her. He looked at the fierce, triumphant light in her eyes. He reached out and traced the line of her jaw. Bidzil, he said again, his voice filled with an emotion that ran deeper than victory. It was reverence, awe, love. She leaned into his touch, the last of her strength giving way to an overwhelming sense of relief. It's over, she whispered. No, he said softly, his lips finding hers once more, this time with a deep, possessive passion. It has just begun. In the aftermath, a choice had to be made. A handful of Corbin's men had been taken alive. A patrol of soldiers would eventually come looking for the missing rancher. Their hidden canyon was no longer safe. We must go, Nalnish announced to his people. Deeper into the mountains, to the place of the hot springs, the sacred valley our grandfather spoke of, a place no white man has ever seen. It will be a hard journey, but there we will be free. He stood before Andrea, the entire band watching them. The question did not need to be spoken. Her old life was gone, destroyed by Corbin. Her new life had been forged in the crucible of battle. But the path forward was still her choice to make. She looked at the faces of the Apache people, the women who now smiled at her as a sister, the children who treated her as a grandmother. She looked at the rugged, beautiful land that had nearly killed her and had then given her a reason to live. And she looked at Nalnish, her partner, her savior, her love, the man who had seen the strength in her when she had forgotten it herself. She thought of the 20 years of loneliness, the silent rooms above her shop, the quiet desperation of a life that was slowly, imperceptibly, fading away. She stepped forward and took his hand. My place is with you, she said, her voice ringing with a certainty that settled deep in her soul. The journey to the hidden valley was arduous, but for Andrea, every step was a step toward her true home. As they traveled, she learned the Apache ways, not as an outsider, but as one of the people. Her hair turned completely silver, and the lines on her face deepened, but they were no longer lines of sorrow. They were a map of a life she had chosen. They found the valley, a paradise hidden from the changing world. Hot springs steamed in the crisp mountain air, and clear water ran year-round. Here they built a new home, a permanent sanctuary. On their first night in the valley, under a blanket of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, the wedding ceremony was performed. The women dressed Andrea in an elaborate beaded deerskin dress. As she stood beside Nalnish, she felt the last broken pieces of her old life healing, reforming into something stronger and more beautiful than she could ever have imagined. Years passed. The world outside changed. The last of the Apache leaders like Geronimo surrendered. But in their hidden valley, Nalnish's band remained, a forgotten pocket of the old ways, their freedom preserved. Andrea became a respected elder, her wisdom sought by all. She never bore children. Her age had made that impossible. But she was a mother to every child in the band, a grandmother to the generations born in that sacred place. She was the keeper of stories, both of the Apache and of the world she had left behind. She was the bridge, the living proof that two worlds could meet not in conquest, but in love. One evening, decades after the battle in the canyon, she sat with Nal Nish outside their wickiup, watching the sunset paint the peaks with fire. His arm was wrapped around her shoulders, a familiar, comforting weight. Their love had become the central legend of their people, a story told to every new generation. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "Leaving your world behind?" She smiled, her weathered hand covering his. "How can I regret choosing this?" she said, her gaze sweeping over the peaceful valley, the sounds of children laughing, of women singing, of a people thriving. "How can I regret choosing love over a cage, dignity over desperation, a life of meaning over a life of mere survival?" She leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke that was forever him. The first stars began to appear. "It's been 30 years since that kiss," she murmured contentedly. "The one before the battle." He chuckled, a warm, deep sound. "And how many kisses since?" "Too many to count," she replied, turning to look at him, her eyes shining with a love that time had only deepened. "And not nearly enough for the years we have left." In a world that tried to break her, to sell her, to erase her, Andrea Martinez had not only survived, she had triumphed. She had rewritten her own story, finding her true home not on any map, but in the heart of a man and a people who saw her for who she truly was. Bidzil, the strong one. And her strength, it turned out, was more than enough. Andrea faced an impossible choice: return to a world that saw her as nothing more than property, or abandon everything she'd ever known for a dangerous and uncertain future with the people who saw her true worth. Do you think she made the right decision? What would you have done in her place? Let me know in the comments below. This story shows that sometimes our greatest strength is found when we're pushed to our absolute limit. It reminds us that it's never too late to fight for the life we deserve, even if it means leaving the whole world behind. If you were moved by this story of courage, survival, and unexpected love, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep incredible stories like this alive, and you don't want to miss the next one we have coming. Thanks for listening.